You've landed at the edge of what medicine has known and what it's becoming. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker, and this is the Integrative Continuum, a podcast bridging biology, energy, and human potential. In each episode, we explore how quantum biology, frequency medicine, and ancient healing systems are transforming our understanding of health. This is where mitochondria meet meaning and blood work meets bioenergetics. Subscribe now and join me on the frontier of integrative healing, where science and soul are no longer separate. Welcome back to the Integrative Continuum. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker, and today we're diving deep into a topic that sits right at the foundation of human physiology: minerals. Most clinicians understand vitamins, hormones, and macronutrients, but fewer realize that minerals drive all of it: mitochondrial energy, nervous system stability, detoxification, blood sugar regulation, adrenal resilience, thyroid function, and so much more. And one of the most valuable tools to understand mineral status over time, not just in the moment, is hair tissue mineral analysis, or HTMA. Today, I'm joined by someone who has devoted her career to exactly this work: Karen Watkins from Mineral Check UK, one of the most respected HTMA services in Europe. Karen has over 20 years of experience in the field of hair mineral analysis. She trained as a nutritional therapist at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition, and early in her career worked alongside David L. Watts. That's Dr. David L. Watts, founder of Trace Elements, one of the most influential figures in mineral analysis. Today, she provides the technical support for Mineral Check, Trace Elements' only UK distributor, and works closely with the laboratory team to ensure high analytical standards. If you have a question about any aspect of mineral testing, Karen is the person who knows the answer, or knows exactly where and how to find it. Karen has lectured widely across the UK and Ireland, teaching the science and clinical application of HTMA at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She has spoken at numerous CPD events, bringing her signature style of mixing regular science with real case histories, making complex mineral physiology accessible and engaging for everyone. Her academic contributions include leading the Institute of Optimum Nutrition and achieving the first foundation degree in nutritional therapy with the University of Bedfordshire, lecturing at the university level, and contributing to the nutritional therapy core curriculum and national occupational standards. She was made a fellow of BANT in recognition of her expertise, leadership, and commitment to advancing nutritional therapy. Karen has also published peer-reviewed research on the nutritional therapy profession, magnesium supplementation, orthosilicic acid, and the use of hair mineral analysis as a clinical tool. Her knowledge, enthusiasm, and strong scientific grounding make her an exceptional educator and a perfect guest for this conversation. In today's episode, we'll explore what HTMA actually measures, why mineral ratios reveal metabolic patterns that blood tests often miss, how stress, environment, and nutrition shape mineral depletion, toxic metals and hidden retention patterns, and practical ways clinicians and the public can restore mineral balance safely and effectively. This conversation is packed with actionable insights, whether you're a practitioner, a health professional, or someone navigating your own future, your own fatigue, thyroid imbalance, metabolic issues. So let's jump in. Now, welcome, Karen. How are you today?
Wow, that was quite an introduction. I was listening to that thinking, yep, that is actually me he's talking about. Wow, thank you so much. That was really kind. I'm doing
Excellent. Well,
great.
it's
I
great to
love
have
that.
you. Like I say, it's nice to have somebody who has such expertise in a level, and I think, there's a lot of stuff out there on nutrition, and I think one of the most areas that's under, I don't know what the right word I want to put is, that it's not the most knowledgeable or the most construed, is probably minerals. So I'm really happy to have you here and talk on really how important it is. So maybe, Karen, if you can start by sharing how you got involved in mineral analysis and eventually became part of Mineral Check UK.
Okay, right. Yep, this might make you laugh. I was a student of nutritional therapy, and I went to a lecture on, and part of that lecture was on mineral testing and HTMA. So I listened to the lecture, and in typical student nutritional therapy style, you practice on your family, your friends. And none of my family or friends wanted to do an HTMA, but I noticed the lab did equine testing. So I tested my horse. And I had loads of questions when I got the report back. So I rang the lab and I asked them for some help. And I thought about it and I rang a second question. And then I rang for a third time. And I actually said at the third time, um, does anybody actually know anything about horses there? Because I'm a little bit troubled by some of the suggestions you're making. And someone that I was talking to said, to be honest, no. What do you know? And so I kind of highlighted my background. So I'd grown up in a racing stable. I competed at county level with the horse that I was testing. And so I just said that, well, this is me. And I happen to be a student at the Institute of Optimum Nutrition. And she said, oh, that sounds so interesting. Do send us your CV. And I was like, yeah, right, thinking it was a joke. 3 days later, she rang up and said, you haven't sent your CV in. I was like, I didn't really realize you were serious. She's like, no, the bosses really want to see it. So I sent my CV in, and then this is a great tip of how to behave at an interview. They interviewed me, and I sat there and said, well, I didn't actually know anything about hair mineral testing other than the lecture I went to, and I didn't think it was that good. Quite like the job, thinking, yeah, you've really put your foot in it there, Karen. And they employed me initially as their equine nutritional therapist until I was qualified, and then I moved over into people. So, I mean, one top tip, clearly be honest in your interview. And also, if you know nothing, say it. And I, from there, ended up where I am today. I had the absolute pleasure of working with Dr. Watts. And I think right at the beginning, I my role when I started working with practitioners were these incredibly well-known practitioners would phone up and they would expect me to have the answer. And my standard answer to everything was, I really don't know, but I will find out. And then I'd go away and I'd research the answer and then I'd go back. And some of these were people that were lecturing me, asking me questions. And I soon got over being intimidated because David Watts at the lab was so helpful. And he'd tell me what to read and so on. And so from there, my knowledge just grew, and that's how I ended up here.
That's fantastic. Yeah. The learning never stops, and that's great. So hair tissue mineral analysis, for a lot of people, they may not even know what that is. I know a lot of times when I bring it to my patients, they're like, what? What's that? Right? And so maybe you could give us a description for those listening in and viewing on what hair tissue mineral analysis is and what it tells us.
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say is it's a laboratory test. If you interview Google, you will see that through the hair, according to Google, you can test for all sorts of things like parasites and food intolerances and so on. And so I kind of want to really put down a marker that is not possible. There are companies that claim you can do this. They are not scientifically validated. So I'd like to really make that point first. There are certain metabolites you absolutely can test through the hair. Like, for example, I think most people are familiar with drug testing, maybe alcohol testing, something like that. You can test those. What we do is we take a sample of human hair and we test it in the laboratory for minerals. Minerals, I think you kind of said this in your introduction, they are at the heart of absolutely everything. So if you test about a teaspoonful of human hair taken really close to the scalp, we can look for 29 nutritional minerals, 9 toxic minerals. And once we know those mineral levels, we will know what vitamins you need because there's a relationship between minerals and vitamins. And we also have an idea about what's going on hormonally. So it's not a diagnostic test, it's a screening test. And unlike blood testing is a snapshot in time. It's just a moment. If you have your blood taken now and you've just eaten a meal that had a lot of fish, and finished off with, say, some Brazil nuts and a bit of watermelon, and with that fish you had some lentils, as an example, what you would get if you took your blood test is you might get a very high potassium level and possibly a high mercury level, depending on what fish you'd had. But if you do a hair test, think of it more as a video. That's what happened to you over the last 3 months if your sample is about an inch long. Now, the sample's weight dependent. So if you've got really long hair like mine, you rake it up and you pull a bit from underneath that no one can see and you cut it off, and then the long bit you discard. If you've really short hair like Richard, remember it's weight dependent. So we just need, I give people a visual, a teaspoonful. And if we have the teaspoonful, we can run the test. And once we have the results, we learn an awful lot about your unique biochemistry. One of my own clients in clinic referred to it as like having her horoscope done, but with her health. And I love that because that really is. Once we have an idea of what's going on with the mineral levels, we know what else is going on as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so we'll throw this question out here. So when you're talking about hair length and weight, now what if the individual out there listening and says, hey, I'm bald, what are we going to do now?
Okay, so the first thing I always say is I check about whether or not they are genuinely bald. A lot of men will say, I'm bald. What that really means is, and in fact, I have someone who works in the office doing admin who would say, I'm too bald, I can't test my hair. But actually, he uses clippers and he does the closest clip you can imagine. So for him, when he tests his hair, he just does an incredibly close clip and collects up the clippings. Perfect. If someone is genuinely bald, as in no hair at all, but they have body hair, you can use pubic hair, chest hair, you can even use fingernails. There are I will put cautions on those. Remember how long your fingernails take to grow. So if you do use fingernails, it's an old pattern. Body hair has a different growth physiology to human hair. It grows to a certain length, hangs around, and then drops out. So when you cut a sample of body hair, be it pubic or chest or whatever you decided to use, you don't know how old the pattern is. So I think if I'm using body hair, I would, in a test, and I'm looking at the results, I would look at the picture rather than specific levels of everything. So I'm getting a general sense. It's not as good as head hair, but it will give you a general sense of what's going on. And something that we do pubic hair for quite a lot is if we run a human hair sample and you come back, something that's quite common in the UK at the moment is arsenic. If you get an exceptionally high level of, say, arsenic, then we will suggest, and the lab will do it free of charge, that we run a pubic sample for that element only, because it will give a little bit of extra information. It'll tell us how long the exposure has been going on for, and give it's just a little more information. So pubic hair has a place, but perhaps it's not as good as head hair.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So you mentioned some of the other modes of testing, and a lot of people go, well, why can't I just test bloods? And I know when I look at them, minerals on a blood test, I say, well, it's because it's not really all that accurate because about 99% of our minerals are intracellular. So it really makes a blood test a really poor indicator of that. But what I would look for more is, well, if there's an elevation of the mineral on a blood test, then as a clinician, I look at that and going, well, if that should be inside of the cell, why is it not inside of the cell? And then we look at other factors on why it may not be absorbing. So, if we can take bloods out of the story, are there any other modes? I know there are some that are doing kind of urine challenge tests. Is that any value, or is that an accurate measurement?
I agree with you and everything you said about blood testing. Urine testing is an interesting one. You can test for urine's minerals through the urine, but to do that effectively, you have to collect the urine over 24 hours, which is inconvenient for most people, and it will only show what's excreted. And there may be a reason something's being excreted. You may not know what it is, and you need to look at the balance of a lot more minerals. So that's the first problem with urine testing. It's inconvenient. It'll show you what's being excreted. And then the challenge tests, those are super interesting. You can do them for a toxic element. Now, you have to take a specific challenge ingredient in order to test. So if we want to taste mercury, we will take we do the test, a urine sample, then we take the challenge, then we retest the mercury later, not the urine for the mercury later. Problem is, take any of the challenge ingredients, you will excrete a heavy metal. Everybody has heavy metals. We all do. I kind of would say it doesn't matter how clean you think your diet is, how clean you think your environment is. We found lead in the ice caps as they're melting. There are heavy metals all around us, and we've all been exposed to them. And even if we think we're being super clean now, A, they turn up in places you'd never think, and B, you probably haven't been super clean your entire life. So everyone's got some heavy metals. So if you do a urine challenge test, you will excrete a heavy metal because we all have them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would
Doesn't
agree.
it's a problem right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. We live in a very toxic environment. I mean, it's probably more toxic than it has been, at least on known record anyways. Especially now more people are living in cities. So there's more pollution around. There's things in the air and the environment and geez, the food we're eating, the cookware we're eating out of, the coffee you drink, your mug out when you go get your takeaway coffee, the medications you put in your body for those that are vaccinating, and we could probably go on and on. We haven't even gotten into the makeup that we put on the skin, the tattoos we put on the body, the
Not
geoengineering stuff they're
really. You're
spraying in the air.
But you're so right. This is something that I say to people when they say to me, "Oh, I've got a test. It shows." I'm like, "Where did it come from?" I'm like, "Well, it could have come from anywhere. If you're 42, you could have picked that up anywhere in the last 42 years." So we have to kind of think about that. And you're right, the sources are so ubiquitous. There's a fabulous Australian study that looks at the levels of heavy metals in dust. And what it finds is A, that cities more way higher than you would expect, and way higher than agricultural areas where actually a lot of the pesticides are being used in farming. So I thought that one was really interesting. And these metals are where you just don't expect them.
Yeah. Now, tell me, would there be a way for somebody to pass it on to another? So, could a mother pass it on to a child in vitro?
Yes, that is one of the routes of transmission. So, absolutely right. They do cross the placenta. Yeah, yeah.
So that puts a whole new twist on birth defects, especially now that we are seeing more of them. And I think the kind of hot topic right now is autism. And the debate about where autism may come from or what may set it off. And I think, at least in my clinical experience, when I've worked with children with autism, and very specifically looking at HTMA tests, they look all exactly the same to me. I see extreme low levels of minerals and really high levels of metals in the system. Would that be something that you're seeing as well?
Yes, we are seeing that a lot. And something else that we're seeing in children that are coming up or being diagnosed is an incredibly low level of copper. And I find a lot of practitioners are very nervous of copper because they believe that the copper may be, in inverted commas, hidden in the system, so they have to be cautious of it. Or a lot of practitioners have been taught in their training that they don't need to think about copper. It's everywhere, so don't worry about it. But what is interesting in the charts of children that we're finding with autism, very low copper is so common. And that's essential for neurodevelopment. It is nerve transmission, brain function, hormone development, copper, immune system. Copper is so critical. And to see it so low now on so many tests is, I find, a little disturbing, particularly when we have a lot of practitioners who haven't really been taught about copper's importance Or, and I find this a lot, are nervous about supplementing copper. But I had a lovely call from a practitioner who, over the last 9 months, has run 3 different HTMAs on the same child. Each time she's done an intervention, done it for 3 months, and then done a retest to see what her intervention is. And every time she's rung for a support call, and I've said, "You really need to give copper. I really would suggest giving copper." And 9 months in, she gave the child's parent the recommendation to use a copper supplement. 6 days later, the child came home from school with a letter. And the letter basically said, "I don't know what you've changed. I don't know what you're doing differently. Just don't stop." The child that would not speak in class is making eye contact and is taking part in things. And I find that quite spine chilling. It is uh, just a testament to how, if you get the basic building blocks right, everything can change. And by the
Absolutely.
way, that's not a recommendation that anyone listening goes out and buys a copper supplement. It is a recommendation to absolutely test. And then if you need it, consider what to do.
Yeah, I think that's important what you just said there about just not going out and just supplementing with anything, because even though it is a natural supplement, we can still create imbalances, and
Totally.
every nutrient has a synergistic relationship with another nutrient, and we can inadvertently be causing more harm than good if we don't really understand that properly. And if the standard public doesn't understand, well, I should say the other way, if the standard medical system doesn't understand it, then the general public doesn't understand it either. So that's why I said at the beginning, I think this is one of the most misunderstood areas of mineral balancing and interactions.
You're so right. I don't know about you when you trained, but one of the things that I was taught, and in fact, it was a bit of a joke when we were training, if you're stuck for an answer, get zinc and magnesium and green leafy vegetables into it. You'll be good. And I spoke to a practitioner who tested her own child who was neurodivergent. She hadn't had the diagnosis of autism, but the child spent a great deal of the day behind the sofa and didn't want to make eye contact or play. And she was putting in really high levels of zinc because that is what the standard textbooks tell you is needed. You're smiling because you know exactly where I'm going to go with that one. Ran the test, and the zinc was off the scale. And so my first point was, well, one, a cofactor for zinc is B6. How much B6 have you been giving? And two, please stop giving the zinc. If you have to correct the relationship between copper and zinc. They work together, but they also oppose each other. So we need to correct that. And it took, I think, 3 calls of her feigning it. Are you sure about this? Are you sure about this? But she did stop the zinc. She put in some B6 so the zinc could be properly used. She didn't supplement with copper, but amazingly, her child loved, I think this is a good clue about how intuitive our bodies can be, loved things like liver, which are high in copper. And 2 weeks later, he came out from behind the sofa and wanted to play with the other children. And I think that's just such a great example of, you can read what it says in the books, but you actually have to look at each person as an individual and then work with what you have, because it may not be what you expect.
Absolutely. And that's why at the clinic I have probably 6 or 7 different forms of magnesium supplements in different combinations depending on what we see. And one doesn't work for everybody. And some that are really bad off, I find the one formula, it's got, like you said, the zinc, it's got the magnesium, it's got the copper, it's got the boron, it's got the B6. Most people that are really deficient, they do very well with that one. But others, they're really good with certain things, but they're just stressed out and they're losing a lot of magnesium. And that maybe with, a certain type of amino acid might work better for them. So, yeah. So, okay. So, what do minerals actually do on a cellular level that makes them so central to health?
I think it'd be quicker to say, what don't they do? They They drive all of the hormones. They mediate our stress response. They are responsible for driving your release of insulin and turning off your insulin. They mediate the immune system. They mediate neurotransmitters. They affect mood. They affect hormones. They affect your ability to gain weight and lose weight. I think there's a really old saying that minerals are the spark plugs of life. And I said that recently to someone who said to me, "What's a spark plug?" And I was like, "Okay, we need to go back a bit here."
Yeah.
So now I'm careful about that. But really, the minerals are at the heart of absolutely everything. You cannot make enough hydrochloric acid, so the bit of the stomach process that will dissolve protein. You can't make enough of that without zinc. You cannot handle insulin without calcium, magnesium, and zinc. You cannot balance your hormones without copper and zinc. You need things like lithium to calm moods. Things like, let's pick a really random one, or the one that came to mind, nickel. Nickel is really involved in things like IBS, but no one ever checks it. But a high level of nickel will give you IBS. So it's disrupting something. We don't know what, but we do know if we can lower the nickel level, the IBS will improve. So I think for me, that's why actually, A, the minerals will just drive everything in your body. B, if you know what's out of balance, that can be fundamental in correcting a health issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use the old spark plugs line as well. I'd say it's like the spark plug for the cell. Without it, there's no spark, there's no energy. So for mitochondrial functioning and optimization, it's definitely very important.
Well, we
Uh,
can't make energy without the minerals, and magnesium is involved in virtually all of the steps to make energy.
yeah, it's definitely probably the number one go-to is magnesium, and not just for not just for balancing, and not because it's just so deficient in our environment or people simply not eating the correct foods. That's probably more of the case, but biochemically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, with high glycemic diets, magnesium is also brought in to downregulate that, as is cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So again, we look at not great diets, people, high glycemic foods, lots of sugar addictions and so forth, and too much stress. And who isn't stressed these days? So no wonder nobody has a normal magnesium level.
Well, that's true, but also sugar is the biggest disruptor of the balance between calcium and phosphorus. We need a really good balance between calcium and phosphorus to make strong bones. Sugar disrupts that. So that's kind of a really key one. And then also, it's kind of interesting, magnesium, because magnesium lowers sodium in the body. And if you lower sodium, you're unable to mediate the stress response. So you start to get aldosterone going too high, we start then too low, and we get these swings with cortisol. And sometimes, because someone's stressed and they've read that stress burns up magnesium, they take a high dose of magnesium and forget that really simple one. They need to be taking some salt too.
Yeah, that's another key recommendation. And it's another one of the big, I have a whole list of food lies that we've been told and that people still believe in this day that really are not keeping them healthy. And salt is a basic one. Salt is like a multivitamin. If you have unprocessed salt, you have really over 80 elements, minerals there that really help to balance the body. And again, when we're stressed, we lose a lot of that. And I think for a lot of people starting off their day with a little bit of salt in their water or some salt and sea mineral based electrolytes, it can really make a huge, huge difference.
Absolutely. I think when I'm working with someone before we've even got the test, the first thing I'll actually want them to do is start adding a little bit of sodium to their food, so salt, and to increase their potassium, because that's the other one. So many people are deficient in potassium, and yet it's so easy to get in. And it's not about supplementing, but things like, the average potassium supplement is 100 milligrams. A cup of lentils is 1,300. Like, what are you going to pick? Go for the cup of lentils. There are so many easy wins with the minerals that I think perhaps because people get too busy, they fall into a cycle of convenience food, which has no sodium, no potassium, no magnesium in. And those are the three that I would say on 85% of the tests I run are really low.
So, why do you think mineral imbalance has become so widespread in modern populations? Maybe that's the key there.
Oh, okay. Great question. Okay, this is a really personal view. I think there are a number of reasons. First off, I think it is the stress under which a lot of us live. You know, I talk to people all the time who say, I don't have any stress in my life. And yet, if you talk to them about their average morning, and I would say that I'm quite good at handling stress, the average morning, no one can find their homework. How does the child not have any shoes? They had like loads of pairs yesterday when they went to bed. Where did they vanish to overnight? And I live on a farm, and someone knocks on the door to tell me that the sheep have got out yet again. I mean, what are they, escapologists or something? So I've got up and I've meditated and I've had my salt water and I'm absolutely chilled. And then within 10 minutes, it's like everything has gone apart. So I've probably burnt through all the sodium, all the potassium, all the magnesium I had. So I think stress is a huge one. But also for a lot of people, they don't really think about when they get stressed, their body switches off digestion. We are not designed to meet the stresses of 2025. We're supposed to be living in our bodies think that we're still in the caveman thing. They think that we're sitting in the cave and there's a saber-toothed tiger outside because we've got stressed. So it switches off digestion because that's really not important. Digesting last night's food is really out of the window here. We've got to mediate the stress.
Yeah.
We've got to be able to have what we need to run or to fight. But for most people, that unrelenting stress means their digestion's compromised. So even if they try really hard with their diet, they won't really get in enough because digestion's compromised. And then, to be honest, our soil is very depleted. A lot of people as well don't eat. I would describe it as eating nose to tail. They don't eat the whole of an animal. They'll pick. They'll eat what they consider to be the best bit. So I think that comes into it as well. And vegetables, a lot of people stick with the same vegetables. We ran a fun thing in the office to see how many different veggies we could get in a day. And I don't know if anyone's listening, you want to try it because actually it does make you aware, and we were already aware of suddenly, although we just said we had great diets, actually the number was a little bit low. And then we had another one where we decided to look at the color. How many different colored foods? That was the challenge. How many different colored foods could each of us get in over the day? And it kind of got us going, okay, well, if I add some oregano to the vegetables, that's a bit darker. If I add some black pepper, that would be another color. And you start to think about what you can add. And that was something that I found super interesting. We actually were targeting to, could we get in? We were giving each other targets. Can you get 40 different colors in tomorrow? And we'd go away and have a go at it. A, it was hard, but B, it did bring home to me how many people eat a very restrictive diet. And they may not think it's restrictive, but just playing around. How many veggie did you get in? How many different colors did you get in? Kind of starts to bring because each of those will give you different minerals.
Yeah. It's, the whole debate about foods and fiber versus proteins and fats, there's a lot of debate, and unfortunately there's a lot of people that are not looking at the biochemical facts. They're looking at more philosophical ideals on it. One, I like what you said about head to tail. I'm very big and I promote that a lot. So um, I believe, and I think biochemically it's a no-brainer that yes, we need to have a sufficient amount of proteins and fats with that make up our major body structure, but also the digestibility is going to be much higher than a lot of other foods. So does that automatically mean that your veggies and so forth that we can eat? And I'd say it depends. Like you said, we're in a very big rush these days, and I think people don't prepare their foods like we used to prepare them. And we need to take the time to prepare them properly. And no, you can't eat everything raw. And maybe you can't eat the skin, or maybe you can't eat the seeds, or maybe it needs to be pressure cooked to break down, or maybe it needs to be cooked with fat to be digested. And these are the things that we seem to have forgotten. And I'm hoping to bring that back so that people can enjoy these foods because just because a food is a whole food or natural doesn't automatically mean it's good for you. But if we take the time to prepare them properly, it can be, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think that's really true. And I also think soil depletion comes into it. Um, I think a lot of practitioners and a lot of people feel that they'll get their selenium level by eating 2 Brazil nuts a day. And I found a really interesting piece of research because I began to think about soil depletion. Like the selenium's got to get into the Brazil nut, so it's got to do that through the soil. So how do I know that the soil that these Brazil nuts are growing in is really good? And you know what? I found this fascinating piece of research that measured the amount of selenium in a kilo of Brazil nuts. And in one piece, 1 kilo, the amount of selenium was 2 milligrams in a kilo. That's virtually nothing. In the next kilogram, it was 68 milligrams. So we've gone up a lot. What is the difference? Only half a kilometer in the rainforest. So we don't really know when we, for example, and I use the Brazil nuts one because it's quite a great one. A lot of people will say, look, if I eat my 2 to 3 Brazil nuts a day, I'm getting a lot of selenium. You might be, but you might not be. And it really does depend on where that Brazil nut was grown. And if you ate 8 Brazil nuts that were grown in some areas, you could have a toxic amount of selenium. But if you have it in the low one, you could probably eat the whole kilo and you're not really going to get anywhere near a toxic amount. So it's kind of really interesting to me that it's also driven by where the food comes from. And it isn't just about having a natural food or a whole food, it's where it was grown is so important. And that's something we just don't know. And in a way, so I'm kind of coming back to the minerals. If we run the test and we say someone is selenium deficient, I never say now go away and eat the Brazil nuts. I say let's supplement because later we might move to try and eat your Brazil nuts daily. Have a couple with breakfast every day. But initially, if someone's deficient and I'm thinking about their thyroid function, we need selenium to convert the inactive T4 to active T3. If we don't have enough selenium, that won't happen. So messing around trying to have a few Brazil nuts to try and impact someone's health may not work. Um, and that study really drove me away from saying, right, let's do this. Now with clients, I would say, let's supplement. We can move to foods later. But for now, we need to supplement.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So again, food quality is going to be really important, whether it's a plant-based food or animal-based food. So now again, we have farmed fish versus something that's caught in the wild. There's going to be a big, huge nutritional difference with it as well. Um, so yeah, it becomes harder and harder to keep things in balance. So yes, there is a place for supplementation. I agree. When there is a deficiency, using it to correct that, and then maintaining it through food, if we can do it through a proper manner, then yeah, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. So so tell me now, since we're talking about minerals, what would be the big foundational minerals you would look at or work with somebody first? Is there a kind of a pecking order?
For me, absolutely. First of all, I would say remember they are always used, they always work synergistically. They support each other in pairs. So calcium and magnesium, a correct balance of the two. You almost need 7 parts of calcium for every one of magnesium for things to be optimal in the body. So calcium and magnesium, sodium and potassium, those two are so important, and copper and zinc and selenium. And I often say to practitioners, if you're looking at a chart and it's new to you and you're feeling overwhelmed, go back to basics. Just make sure someone has a good level of selenium. Remember, they can't absorb that without vitamin E. So focus on that. And then what can you do to balance calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, copper, and zinc? Yeah, and there's all these other elements that we've tested for, and there are toxic elements showing and things. If you're feeling overwhelmed, they are my top ones. Look at them in a pair and get your pair balanced. Have a good level of calcium, magnesium, a good sodium, potassium, correct copper, zinc. Make sure there's a good level of selenium. And That's the cheat's guide to mineral balancing. You've just balanced the lots because the rest start to fall into place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that you said that. I think I'm 90% on track, so that's good.
Okay.
Great. Um, okay. So when we look at HTMA test, you also have slow oxidizer and fast oxidizers. So somebody that doesn't understand that, can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. It's about how your body burns energy, what burns glucose for energy in the Krebs cycle. So when I'm explaining it to someone, I usually keep it super simple. It's how your body is going to burn the raw material of glucose to make energy. Now, we all do that in an inefficient way. And a slow oxidizer they will have great endurance and they might manage little sparks, but they can't keep energy up in a sustained pattern. And I would say what we're looking at in the UK, 85% of all tests are slow oxidizers. So the adrenals are sluggish, the thyroid is sluggish, digestion is sluggish. And I keep it really simple with the oxidation. You're just making your energy inefficiently. Our role now as practitioners is to give you the raw materials. We're back to the basic spark plugs that will help you make your energy super efficiently.
Okay. So somebody theoretically could go bounce back and forth between them.
Ah, that's interesting. Most children will be born as fast metabolizers. You have to have that very fast metabolism to make the very early growth that is needed in if you think how rapidly they go from being this little tiny to running around as 2, 3-year-olds, and then they shoot up again and again. To make that rapid growth, the body needs to burn through things very quickly. So most children are fast oxidizers. Will you bounce through back and forth? Very, very rarely. What tends to happen if your mother and father are slow oxidizers, you will become a slow oxidizer. So part of the reason we see so much of it, because obviously if we have 85% in the UK, we're going to keep getting more and more.
Mhm.
But also stress, illness, trauma can switch the child from being a fast oxidizer to a slow oxidizer. So it is harder to switch back and very, very unusual. There's nothing wrong. Both are, you're either one or the other.
Yeah.
Neither one is better than the other. And I always make that point because I think there's a little bit of an image, and some people, when they see, oh, I'm a slow oxidizer, that kind of means I'm fat and frumpy. I don't like that. I want to be fast. And it's like, no, that's not what it means. It's about making energy. Is interesting is a lot of the children that are on the spectrum in some way are nearly all slow metabolizers. So something, and even if they're very young, something has switched them to being that. And sometimes if you talk to the mother about what it was like in pregnancy, you might find that at the point morning sickness cleared was often the point that the baby's adrenals started to produce teeny tiny amounts of hormones. And to the mother, the host body, if you like, those teeny tiny amounts of hormones fed her stress pattern and allowed her to feel better as the pregnancy progressed. So we have babies that are born essentially with adrenal exhaustion and slow metabolic types.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. Okay. All right. So that was oxidizers. So what else do we have on the test? We have mineral ratios. So when somebody looks at and they go, what's this calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Can I think of that, and I'll often explain it as like a seesaw. Too much of one will knock out the other. So, too much calcium will lower and suppress magnesium. Too much copper will lower and suppress iron. Too much iron will lower and suppress copper. Think of them as a seesaw. What that chart means with those ratios is it is about balance, and it shows you where you need to intervene. Because when they work together, you have optimal health. When they start to oppose each other, you don't. And so we can look at, say, the calcium-potassium ratio. That'll give us a clue about how the thyroid is functioning. If we don't have enough potassium, the body can't pick up the thyroid hormone. If we look at calcium, magnesium, we have a clue about how the body is reacting to insulin and managing its sugar. But also, we have a clue about the integrity of the cell membrane. And if the cell membrane is compromised, then potentially the signals going into the cell can float back out again. And so we have inefficient cell signaling as well. So we can look at iron and copper. That will give us a good indication about what's going on with the immune system. Iron. If iron elevates, it will do that sometimes because a bacterial infection is present. Bacteria feed on iron. The body's an incredibly intelligent piece of kit. If there is a bacteria around, it will remove iron from the blood and put it in the tissues to stop the bacteria feeding in it. And something I'll often say to people is, when I say, do you think there might be a bacterial infection present? And they'll come back and say, definitely not. I will ask them when the last time they saw a dental hygienist is, because one of the places bacteria reside in the mouth. And a good dental hygienist will clean them. They can clean under the gum line. They can displace that bacteria very easily, very, very quickly. And then you can start to correct that ratio. You also can get bacteria in the gut that the body might be protecting as well by removing the iron. So I've gone way off topic. I told you this would happen. But anyway, it is about a balance. And how do I explain those ratios? Think of a seesaw. You need the seesaw to be balanced. You really don't need one down here, one up here. And with the mineral ratios, you always need enough of the nutrients to balance the toxins. So for some people, there might be a level of mercury at, say, 0.12 milligrams percent, which would be quite high. That would be like 120 parts per million. But if there's a really good iron level and a really good selenium level, that mercury might not be causing a problem. In someone else, the mercury might be causing a problem because they don't have the nutrients to balance it. And sometimes if you can give more of the beneficial nutrients, we go back to the seesaw, we can kind of flip the toxin off the end because we've put the balance, we've overbalanced it, so we can help the body remove it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And maybe that explains why some people, they can seem to have a somewhat toxic habits, maybe drinking or smoking, but maybe on the side they're eating a kilo of oysters and liver every day, which are mineral rich. Maybe that has something to off-put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, there's always the kind of, they might have the genetic predisposition that means they can drink alcohol, they can smoke, they will deal with it. And so they might have really great detoxification pathways. But just sometimes their diet is actually really, really good. And I have seen this with really good diets in someone that smoked and drank heavily. So much so that when I ran the test, I was expecting it to be really, really deficient. And when I talked to him, he loved cooking and he cooked for his whole family. So the children and his wife ate great food. Yeah, sure, he smoked heavily, but I think the diet was compensating a lot for that and really helping.
Absolutely. Home cooking, preparing foods properly. And it sounded like he loved his life and his family, which is a big part of it as well. No big stressors.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. So we've been talking about heavy metals, and I find when we do these tests, everybody wants to jump right away to the heavy metals. They want to know, what toxins do I have in their system? So, um, what patterns might suggest a hidden metal retention, even though it seems low on the report? Is there some kind of hidden meaning there that there's still something there?
Trying really hard not to laugh. I should have tipped you off about this one. Don't ask me about hidden patterns. I should have tipped you off before we began.
Right.
Okay. So I know a lot of really respected authors talk about hidden patterns. And you know what? If you're going to talk about hidden patterns, why did you do a test in the first place? You're just playing guesswork. with what you see. It is as simple as that. Are there clues about whether or not a heavy metal might be hidden? There are. You get out your pen, you get out your paper, and you take a case history. And you take a case history in the most minute detail. You want to know what was happening when the baby was in the womb. Now, you're probably not going to know that because you haven't got mum in your clinic with you. But where was the child born? Where did the drinking water come from? What did they play with? Really detailed. Where did they go on holiday? What did they play with when they were on holiday? Really, really detailed. And you might pinpoint a time when they were exposed to a heavy metal. And so you're looking at your chart and you still don't know whether they've cleared it or not. And so you might think it's a problem. But if you kind of are looking at the chart going, okay, well, I think there's a hidden heavy metal, you're just playing guesswork. Work with what you've got. And I spent a long time. I did a seminar recently with David, Dr. David Watts in the lab. And before we went on, I said, okay, I'll monitor the questions and I'll give them to you at the end, and or maybe as we go along. And he said, just one thing, Karen, if anyone asks me about hidden out, don't bother bringing it to me because I'll just be rude about it. I was like, okay, I'm more tactful. I'll cover the hidden stuff. I really feel work with what you see on a chart. Now, that doesn't mean if you've got no heavy metals, that there might be some in storage. Remember, one, heavy metals have really strong lipotrophic bonds. That means they bind to fat cells. And the body's clever. It's not going to release them until it has got the raw ingredients to deal with them. So they're also, the heavy metals, they get stored in things like the bones. Lead gets stored primarily in the long bones. So if you look at someone in their 60s, 70s with perhaps some bone breakdown, heading towards osteopenia or osteoporosis, you might start to see the heavy metals climb. If you'd looked at them maybe 10 years earlier, you might not have seen it. It's that the body's put it in storage. And I liken this when I talk to my own clients as like, I'm probably going to reveal a little bit more about my life, but I liken it to the cupboard under the stairs. When you have someone coming around, you may not, I fly around, collect up all the crap and shove it in the cupboard under the stairs. We only ever clean that out when we have the time and the resources. And the body is a little bit like this. It will collect up a heavy metal. If it cannot remove it, it will put it into storage. You don't know whether it's done that or not. The key thing is you want to look at here is, are there enough nutrients to balance the teeny tiny bit that's showing on my chart? Now, if you have someone with a pattern that some of us call 4 lows, but very, very low levels across all of the minerals, then you might have a toxic element in storage and the body doesn't have the resources. So go back to what I was saying about the energy and the time to deal with that. So it's put it into storage. If you were to try and antagonize that out now, well, the body, that intelligently designed bit of kit, has put an element that it can't deal with tightly into storage. And then the practitioner comes along and says, well, I think looking at this, it's hidden. I'm going to try and get you to detox it. Well, like, why? How do you know more than that really intelligently designed bit of kit? I would always say, if it shows up as low on your test, great. Let's focus on the nutritional elements. Let's not look for something that is not there.
Yeah.
Always, always work with what you can see. Always work with what you have.
So then what's the difference between, let's say, a true toxic exposure versus, let's say, a redistribution through a detox?
Well, none, because you've still got the heavy metal floating around. The detox, if you have detoxed an element, depends how you've done that. So if you've used, and I'm going to keep it a little bit general, and we can dive into it a bit more if we need to, but if you've used something like a chelating element, a chelator works, it comes from the Greek chlor. It works by grabbing an element, toxic element, where it is safely stored and tries to remove it. What you're really looking at here now is how strong is that bond? If potentially you could have moved a heavy metal from somewhere it was, in inverted commas, safely stored, and then the bit that's holding it, your chelating agent, may just drop it and it may end up somewhere else. So I think to potentially try to in inverted commas, detox, you run the risk of doing more damage than less. So what I would say is if I'm looking at a chart, I would look first at what those levels of toxic elements are and always look at what the nutrient levels are. The higher the nutrient level on all the nutrients, the more able the body is to remove a toxic element.
So then the mineral deficiencies really need to be sorted in order for your ability to detox the metals.
Absolutely. And that is something that I really try to bring home to my clients. Yes, you're absolutely right. As soon as you give someone a chart, they go straight to the heavy metals, and that's the bit they focus on. They really love them.
Yeah.
And I think that's because they recognize them. They know they're harmful. They get excited about them. I always guide them back. It's the nutritional elements that will let your body deal with the toxic elements. Get those as good as you can. And the toxic elements, in a way, they fade away without you actually needing to do that much about them.
So what's your view on binders? Some people say you can't get them out if you don't have binders, and then others will say, well, all you need to do is mineral balance and your body will get it out. Or is it a bit of both?
I'm probably nearer the balance the minerals, your body will do what it's designed to do. But there are things I will put in. So the research is great on pectin. So I'll put in apple pectin. Stewed apples, absolutely great. They're a source of fiber, but they will help the body. Leaf coriander, the research is really good on leaf coriander. So let's get in leaf coriander. Broccoli, sulfidine. Broccoli is so helpful at giving the body the raw ingredients to remove them themselves. We could use citrus pectin, we can use sulfur. Remember, all of the heavy metals in nature bind to sulfur. So we need high sulfur. Proteins, amino acids, they're going to give us sulfur. Garlic, onions, that sort of thing. They're all going to give us good sources of sulfur. So to get those properly sorted, we need great digestion. I just realized the sun is really pouring in through my window.
You're fine. We can see you. You got a nice
That's cool.
halo.
Okay. So I would work on food that will help bind up. Fiber is essential. I would never try to detox anybody who has not got great bowel function. Hydration, absolutely key. A lot of these metals will be removed out through the kidneys, so we need great hydration. So I think there's a lot we can do around diet, and then we can use the minerals in order to mop things up, give the body the raw materials to deal with the excretion. The only time I really vary that is in preconception. And then I might use something like zeolite. And I'm kind of moving away from how I would normally work, and I will always talk to the couple about this. But actually, preconceptual infertility, that point, the most important thing for the couple that's come into the clinic is having the baby. And so we will work quicker. And so I will talk them through. You might feel awful, but they don't care because the baby is the important thing. So that, and they're often, if I talk to them about, I want to balance the minerals, but I need to give binder, and that's fine. They're all really happy to do that. So they're often quite happy to take a lot of supplements because the end goal is really for them clear. And so there I might work quicker than I would normally. But most of the time, I will focus on the nutrients, put in appropriate foods to support the body with the cleaning up, and let the body deal with it.
You mentioned fiber. Boy,
Yep.
there's a controversial topic amongst many different diet types. Now, I think in terms of what we're discussing, I think there's a difference between the soluble fibers and the insoluble fibers. And I would believe that the soluble fibers are what we need to look at. And that's where your apple pectin is coming from, because solubles are basically, well, anything that has a seed in it. So technically fruits, I would imagine. Would you agree with that, or would you have a
Yeah,
differing
I
opinion?
would.
Yeah.
I would. Yeah.
Yeah, because solubles will absorb water to a certain degree, and therefore we can get some of the value from that, where there may be more debatable about insoluble fibers. But like I said,
I think
It's a big.
insoluble fibers is a whole big debate, but the soluble fibers will, and certain parts of them are super helpful in trying to eliminate toxic elements.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So your work is primarily in the UK, in Ireland. What would be the most kind of common mineral deficiencies that you see, or is that the kind of the same everywhere?
No, one of the most common things that we see in the UK and Ireland is really elevated calcium. So that's calcium that the body has that is bio unavailable. And I'm sure you're seeing this a lot in your clinic. This really extremely high off the graph level of calcium, and then very low levels of other nutrients. That's so common. And it to me, it's really interesting. This is really common in the UK and in Ireland, not so common in the rest of the world. The rest of the world is beginning to catch up, which kind of begs the question, what is going on with all of that calcium? And I do talk a lot with people about making calcium bioavailable. Why is the body putting the calcium into storage? Why is it storing it in the cells? And storing calcium in the cells, that'll cause fatigue, dry skin, joint aches, all of those things. So lots of other symptoms, but primarily, if we can get the calcium properly used, I notice that things like fatigue, skin health improves, joint pains vanish. So talk to people about bioavailable calcium. Give the body the ability to use the calcium. That's so, so important. And
Yeah,
that brings us right back to digestion. We need good protein digestion for the body to absorb the calcium. We need good protein for the body to make a matrix in the bone to lay the calcium on. And then we need all these cofactors. We need K2 to tell the calcium where to go. We need magnesium and manganese and vitamin C and vitamin E and vitamin B6. We need all of those to get the calcium really used. So very elevated calcium is an incredibly common pattern, and a lot of dealing with that is about making the calcium really bioavailable.
yeah, I would agree. I see. Yeah, you're right. I do see in the clinic people with a lot of high calcium levels, and again, I'm like I said earlier, I'm going, well, why is that not getting into the cell? And I'm going, first of all, I'm going to look at, well, what's going on with their magnesium? And then I'm going to look at their vitamin D because without vitamin D, we can't absorb minerals. But then vitamin D by itself won't do much because if we don't have that in balance, then it just bioaccumulates in the tissues. And that's probably why I have the problem in the first place. So, like you said, adding in the vitamin K and the other cofactor, your A from a retinol source so that you can actually absorb things. So, maybe this is why in the UK and Ireland, because we don't get as much light or we don't have as much exposure, part of that pathway of that conversion of our fatty acids under our skin isn't occurring. So maybe that's part of it.
Can I come in there?
Yeah, please do.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't think it is part of it. And the reason I don't think it's part of it is if we take a country like Finland, calcium only occurs on 48% of the tests. So we don't have any great light levels there for a huge chunk of the year.
But what do they eat that we generally don't eat?
A very good point. So that might be part of it. Yeah.
Yes. They tend to have a higher fatty fish diet.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's a big part of it. It's when you start to break it down. Well, could it be this? Could it be that? And it's so interesting. It maybe if we all ate a lot of fatty fish, that would improve things.
Yeah. And see, and
And the
in
whole
Ireland and the
business
UK, the fish they
we
like is from fish and chips, which doesn't count.
absolutely doesn't count at all. And vitamin D is quite an interesting one because I think for me there's a huge paradox in this vitamin D because the body, when the calcium really elevates like that, the body wants to lower vitamin D to stop calcification in the tissues. And yet, if we've only read part of the story, it's winter, better take some vitamin D, we are maybe doing the very opposite thing that our internal biochemistry is trying to do. So internally, the body might be being a little bit anthropomorphic about it here, but bear with me. The body's going, well, look, we've got all this elevated calcium. We can't really use it. Let's drop vitamin D because we don't want that to calcify in the tissue. And then a practitioner comes along and measures the vitamin D level and goes, hey, that vitamin D is a bit too low, to give you vitamin D. And the body's going, but I don't really want that. I'm trying to get rid of it. And you're forcing more in. So I think for me, there is this paradox with vitamin D. And of course, we measure the storage form of vitamin D, and we can't store vitamin D without magnesium. And you must be seeing this on virtually all of your tests. People are magnesium deficient. So there's this whole, for me, this, and I read a lot of the forums, and a lot of the advice is just take vitamin D because it's winter. And I'm like, no, no, know what is going on and what's going on for you personally. Run your minerals. Is your body actually lowering its vitamin D because it can't use the calcium? And do we need to start there, getting that calcium used? Maybe your body can't store vitamin D because it's got no magnesium. So let's get the magnesium in. There's a whole big picture around it. I think the vitamin D for me story has become one that has become oversimplified.
Yeah. Yeah.
I often say to people when I'm chatting and or lecturing, I think if we called it steroid D, we'd all be a lot more cautious about handing it out.
Absolutely. If because technically it is a hormone, so if we did give it the hormone title, yeah, people would look at it differently, wouldn't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I get why there is this vitamin D, but for me, I always go, well, hang on, there is a lot more to the D story than simply. And you are the first person who's actually came up with, and you're quite correct, Finland, they eat a lot of fatty fish, because I normally have to bring that one in at the end. So full play to you for getting that one. But it is true. It's all a big picture and it's all interrelated. And I worry that the vitamin D story has become one of, you're in the UK, you're in Ireland, it's winter, take vitamin D. I think that's oversimplified it a lot.
Absolutely. It's, my own story with vitamin D. I used to be supplement with D all the time until I started learning more about it. And then I stopped taking vitamin D and I kept measuring my levels about 3, 4 times a year. I increased the amount of fats from proteins, let's be very specific. Ate more organ meats, shellfish when I remember now and then, and smaller type fatty fish like sardines, anchovies, and that. And and my levels stayed pretty good. And then I started taking, well, you know what? I'm not going to take vitamin D supplement. I'm going to take cod liver oil instead, which will have a natural amount of DKNA because nature does everything in perfect balance. And I've never had any issues with it since. And when I think back to when I was a kid and my parents ramming that horrible, unflavored at that time in life, unflavored cod liver oil down, I already had a good basis and start there. So I try to bring those things back into play with people. And I think the two biggest things once people balance out their diets, I find if they stick with a good magnesium supplement and a cod liver oil, they don't really need much other than if they're stressed out, maybe taking a sea minerals or some extra salt or something like that. And most people seem to do very well with that.
Yeah, you've really broken it down into the building blocks that are the most needed. And I love your vitamin D story because I decided to try an experiment in that I wouldn't take any vitamin D, but I would boost my magnesium and just see what happened to my body's ability to store vitamin D. I mean, one of the fun things, I'm sure it's true for you, about actually, you may not be quite as erratic as I am in this, but one of the things that I think is really fun is that because I work in mineral check, I can test my hair regularly. And I love a personal experiment. And I think that my colleagues in the office just groan when I come in and go, okay, I've had this really good idea. Let's see what happens if. So we'll all test our hair as a baseline today. And then we're going to do this for 4 months. And then we're all going to test our hair again. And we're going to see what changed. And I can see them like head in the hands. What are we going to have to do now? But the vitamin D one was really interesting. How if you just got magnesium in, and I didn't do anything different sunlight wise, I didn't go out and sunbathe or anything like that. I just went about my day as I had done in previous years. My vitamin D levels went up. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So much so that one of my colleagues actually said, "Karen, how much are you supplementing?" And was really surprised when I said none.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love the cod liver oil. I remember being a child. If you refused cod liver oil, you were definitely not sick enough to stay off school. If you actually accepted in my family as a child the cod liver oil, you were definitely sick enough to stay off school. And that was my mother's firm marker. If you wouldn't have the cod liver oil, you were not sick.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it gets back to good wholesome eating, and you know, diet has become such a controversial topic and made to be so complicated. And I'm like, well, most of the time, if we do what our grandparents and great grandparents did, you're probably going to be far much off better with that because they didn't have all the processed crap. They took their time, made the food properly. They ate as a family and didn't run all over the place. All things that most people aren't doing now. And the other day I made a video because people are asking me, well, what does Doc Rock, sorry, that's my nickname. What does Doc Rock eat? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a video. So I made a video of me cooking my dinner. I came home. I had a nice fatty ribeye. Okay. And then I had nice bone broth that my lovely partner made, and we make it the right way. Marrow bones, beef bones, and chicken feet. So when that thing cools down, it's like a big, nice jelly, kind of gelatinous. Heat that up. And then I had made some liver pate, which again, you saute it in a little bit of butter and stuff like that. And then I had some fermented sauerkraut, some raw unpasteurized fermented sauerkraut. And I'm going, these are all mineral packed foods with plenty of fats that you can absorb. It keeps your stomach healed, absorbs all your nutrients, provides you energy. And, and that's what I basically eat most of the time.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that is so interesting. The other one that I find quite interesting is I often look at a chart, and if it's a practitioner's chart and they've got a great level of manganese, I will ask them if they drink black tea. And by that I mean the builder's tea, the PG tips, the Tetley tea. And there's always a little bit of a kind of a pause, and then a shuffling of the feet, and then there's a kind of yeah, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay, that's where your manganese came from. Manganese is so hard to get into the diet. And as practitioners, when we're overhauling someone's diet, we take out things like the caffeinated teas and coffees, and that's fine, but we do it. But actually, the people who have great levels of manganese drink builder's tea. And there is a really interesting study done on some dock workers, and they were really, really low in everything, but they had this phenomenally high manganese levels. And the reason they had those great manganese levels, they drank mug after mug after mug of black tea. And I sometimes think we can have great, and you're doing brilliantly with your diet, but we talk to people as practitioners and they take away the bits they can do really easily. Dr. Rock said I should avoid the tea and I should maybe switch it for chamomile or whatever you've said. And they take out, and they haven't quite figured out where that manganese is going to come from next.
Mhm.
And that's where we come back to, well, where does it come from? We need a really good whole food diet. We need really good digestion for that to come through. We do need to be eating the whole of the animal. And I talk a lot about, making pate because it's super easy to make. And that's a great way of getting in food, liver, that a lot of people don't like. And I love your bone broth. You've got in there the chicken feet. You've actually gone through the whole, well, I am going to eat nose to tail, and I'm not going to sit there with the feet, but I'm going to turn them into something that I can make into soup later and things like that.
I think, yeah. And I think however many years we want to put back, people got more out of their food because one, they had to make more out of it. But today, let's say if we look at a chicken, I'm sure 100 and 200 years ago, the chicken didn't have the big, fat, huge breasts that they do now. They were more skinny little things. So you didn't have a lot of meat on there. So in order to get all the nutrients out of it, you ate all the organs. You took the carcass and you boiled it for a day or whatever to suck every little bit of nutrients that you could get out of it. You made a broth, you made a soup with it or something like that. So things have changed with time as well.
Hugely. Hugely. And people don't have time to grow their own food. And I mean, I don't mean like, growing a few tomatoes, a few courgettes over the summer. I think people don't grow their own food. And I can remember the communities that I was around as a child. Um, my great, I had a lot of great aunts and so on. And they lived in very rural communities and they were growing their own food, but they were composting, they were feeding back the soil. So the soil is producing more food, but it's also remaining really nutrient dense. So I think it's partly, yeah, we ate more, but also if we were growing it ourselves, we were looking after the ground in which we grew it.
There's a question I wanted to ask. Are you seeing, okay, let me rephrase that. What type of conditions or disease conditions have you seen resolved by mineral balancing and that? So we mentioned autism earlier. Another one that I frequently have showing up at the clinic is people with MS. And I find when we mineral balance and get rid of metals, a lot like autism, I see with MS, a lot of low levels of minerals and a lot of high levels of metals. Are you seeing the same thing?
Definitely, that's a very common pattern. We also did some work in the lab actually on MS, which might interest you, because with MS you would commonly expect to see a very low copper level, because copper is responsible for building the myelin sheath up. What we actually started to see was actually there were a lot of MS people coming in with very high levels of copper, and a high level of copper can come around as a result of an infection and the way the immune system is moderating it. And it may be that there was a virus that was crossing the blood-brain barrier and creating the damage to the myelin sheath and the scarring, which is leading to the MS diagnosis. Correct the mineral pattern, and conventional medicine will say it's gone into remission. But that work made me think that we give a label to a condition that might actually simply have been a mineral imbalance. So one that I see a lot, osteoarthritis. Things like molybdenum will reduce the pain if it's low, quite significantly.
Mhm.
Boron will help actually a lot. That one is really well researched in dropping out pain levels. Improving magnesium and manganese levels will start to correct how the calcium is being used so it won't collect in the tissues. So the diagnosis, osteoarthritis, yeah, is actually perhaps for some people a mineral imbalance. I had one client come in and her fingers were incredibly knotted and gnarled and they were bent. They were like claws. And obviously we work on diet and work on supplements. And at her follow-up point, 6 weeks later, she had her wedding rings back on, she had very attractive dress rings back on, and her fingers were straight. And I found that remarkable. So she'd had a diagnosis, a word attached to something that was probably just a fundamental mineral imbalance. Um, so for me, I think a lot of the conditions that we say are actually driven by a mineral imbalance and what conventional medicine will call remission is actually bringing the body back to a more natural, healthy position.
Absolutely. That's music to my ears. I'm glad I'm not the only one that thinks like that. I think a lot of things are just given labels that they can keep you in the system and sell you more crap that you actually don't need. I believe most things are nutritional imbalances or deficiencies and toxicities. And once you deal with that, which HTMA test is all about, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
it's in the future. I hope that this test is used a lot more, but it's not just about using the test. It's about learning how to understand and have a practitioner that understands that. And I think that's where the problem comes because in my experience, there's very few people that understand mineral and nutrient balancing out there because again, there's so many different weird philosophical ideas about diet types and I'm like, "Oh my, where is this all coming from? Why is nobody looking at the biochemical basics, you know?"
Well, you asked me this question about, what do I see come up so much? And, I think depression is probably one of the key that crosses my desk. I'm sure it crosses yours too. Depression. And conventional medicine has offered the antidepressant. And someone comes in and they'll say that their antidepressant isn't really working, or they've been told they need to up the dose, or they've stopped taking it because they didn't feel great on it, but now they feel really miserable. And I'll talk to them about, okay, we need to look at your copper level. Way too much copper will be affecting a symptom of that is depression. Not enough, you won't be making your neurotransmitters. We need to look at what's happening with your potassium level. Maybe you're not picking up the hormones you need. We need to look at what's happening with your sodium level. There might be an inflammation present. We need to look at what's going on with your manganese, and we'll talk about them. And all of a sudden, we need to know if there's a toxic element because all of those are so researched in toxicity. I must tell you at the end, there's a brilliant study that's just happening in Leeds. I think it's super interesting. I know you will too. I'm going to go off topic. Stick to the point, Karen. Um,
You're
so
fine. You're
I
fine.
give them like, there are 5 things that really may be playing a huge part in your depression. So let's tackle them all. And we can run the mineral test and we can really hone in on which ones are the most important for you. And we can work with that. And their mood almost immediately brightens because somehow a practitioner's come across and come, okay, well, you've got depression. It's just a label. Let's work with the imbalances we can find and see what happens. And all of a sudden, we've taken them from a position of no hope, I'm just going to feel like this forever, to, oh, okay, she's confident. I can change something. So I'll do what she said and see what happens. And that point about practitioners, I ran a training course this year, just gone, for practitioners. I trialed it the year before and then created a directory of practitioners that I was completely confident on that can read an HTMA, because I agree with you. It's not just about getting the test and going, well, this is low, I take it, but it is about looking at the picture overall and knowing what to do. So at Mineral Check, we actually have a directory of practitioners that we can refer people to. And it's I love it. It's searchable. My PA had so much fun putting it together. It's searchable. So if you decide that you want to have the mineral test done because it's infertility is your thing, you can look for practitioners that
Mm.
specialize in that. You can look for practitioners that specialize in autism. You can look for practitioners that specialize in mood disorders. There's a whole it's kind of a whole thing there. And I thought that was a really important thing to do because I wanted to make sure when we at Mineral Check are referring people, we put them in touch with practitioners that we have every confidence in understanding the test.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm gonna look into your course myself. I got to get myself on that list. Yeah.
Right. So the bit that I was going to tell you is so interesting, and I warned you at the outset, you can get me off topic so easily. In Leeds, in the UK, they have just started, well, they're recruiting at the moment participants. They've approached 1,500 parents. The aim is to recruit 500 children under the age of 6 to measure lead levels. Now, they're going to measure it in the blood, and you and I know that's not that great. You have to have a current exposure for it to show up in the blood. But I was really interested in the study because they talked about all of the impacts you and I know that lead has on development, cognitive development, the immune system. They talked about that. And it's very, very orthodox. And the reason they're doing it is because a little group of GPs in Yorkshire got together and decided that when they were measuring iron levels in the blood, they would measure lead levels too, just to see if there was a correlation. And they found, no surprise to you, they found one. And so they've now got this really big study going. And I was listening to an interview with the lead researcher, and the interviewer said, but how can lead be an issue? I mean, we don't have it in petrol anymore. And I can see you smirking. No, we don't have it in petrol anymore, said the lead researcher, but it is a very widespread toxin and it shows up in dust. And this is the bit that I was super excited about. This is actually the first study for over 35 years that will actually look at lead levels in children. And it's the first study that has been done comprehensively since lead was removed from petrol. And I thought that was just so exciting.
Yeah. Well, when we think how many products are made with petrochemicals, I mean, and look at the stuff that kids are putting in their mouth. I remember something that, I don't know how long ago, maybe a year or two. where I think they were considering, was it Lego? I believe they were considering changing from plastics to using hemp because it would be more climate friendly and less toxins and stuff like that. So maybe there's some hope yet.
I think so. And I think little studies like that, which I kind of like, it's not in hair, but it's on a heavy metal, and it's really interesting, and it's very mainstream. So it gives me confidence that very slowly we are moving in the right direction.
Good. Okay, so what myths about hair mineral testing would you like to dispel permanently?
That you can test for food intolerances through the hair, you can't. That you can test for pesticides through the hair, you can't. Um, that it is unreliable. I love this one. This one comes up a little bit. There was a study done in 2020, I think, and it was done by a set of 6 authors. And what they did was they sent one sample of hair to a number of different laboratories. I'm trying to remember the exact number. 6 of the laboratories sent in absolutely identical results. It was 9 labs. 2 labs sent in almost identical results, but they didn't match the others for 4 elements. And the reason for that was they were labs that wash the hair. So it's really important that you have a lab that doesn't wash the hair, because if the lab washes the hair, it disturbs the really important minerals that are lightly bound, like sodium and potassium. And then one lab was responsible for over 80% of the statistically different findings. And in choosing that lab, the researchers had overlooked other labs that were licensed and regulated. So the researchers had deliberately introduced bias. And that study is sometimes still quoted today as hair analysis is unreliable. I'm like, well, actually, if you read the study, you'd be so impressed
Hmm.
at how reliable it is, because if 6 labs can turn in identical results, that's really stringent. And if the lab that can't is unlicensed and unregulated, just maybe the authors introduced bias by choosing that lab. And given that one of those researchers ran a website called Quackwatch, you might just kind of click that he was a little biased, and he did that to prove a point. And for me, what's really interesting is that study came out when I first started working with mineral analysis, and it was written up in the Lancet. And the Lancet said, very, very, very poshly Lancet, shouldn't really be using this test. It's not very, very reliable, is it? This study says not. 2 pages on from that, a very well-known specialist at Great Ormond Street said, hair mineral analysis is the test to do if you have a child with a behavioral disorder, because it's non-invasive, it's reliable, and we can use the results in a really positive way. But what people picked up on was the editorial, not the Great Ormond Street specialist research. And I found that kind of quite interesting. And so my first myth debunk would be, actually, it's super reliable, but know what you're using it for. So you can't do things like food intolerances and parasites. It's super reliable for the minerals. And what else? Oh, yeah, you can't test dyed hair. About 30 years ago, you couldn't test dyed hair, because any women listening to know will know, if they're of a certain age, 30 or 40 years ago, the dyes that were being used were really, really aggressive, and you had to use a really, really strong bleach. Now, most women are not using products anything like that. They're using very gentle products. They're using highlights rather than bleaching whole heads. And so, yeah, you can test your hair even if it's dyed.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So what do you see the future of HTMA testing in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see the trend going?
I'd love to see it becoming a lot more mainstream. What surprises a lot of alternative practitioners is that Mineral Check, we actually test for an NHS hospital. And I'd love to see that continue growing. And I think it might. I I think it's probably locked into. I feel that eventually mainstream medicine will pick up on the things that you and I have been saying for years about diet, but also will start to pick back up on the mineral levels. One thing I do find a lot in the industry that you and I work in is that we have more and more sophisticated and advanced testing. And a lot of that for me is very downstream testing. We can test the hormone levels, perhaps, of a woman, and we can start to adjust them. But actually, if we cycle back, we look at their minerals, if we actually deal with the minerals, that is the root, not the downstream. And if we look at, say, gut health, this is what I talk about a lot. You can run a test on the GI tract. You can start to modulate some of the bacteria. But unless you know what certain minerals are like, it will be a little bit like cutting the lawn. The problem, the mineral pattern is still there. So there are some gut bacteria that really love a high copper environment and they protect it for their own ends. And it doesn't matter what you do. You can come in and you can give supplements and you can give antipathogens and you can give herbs and you can knock them back. But as soon as you remove, say you're using a herb, as soon as you remove that, little bacteria are still there. They just went into hiding for a bit. You just knocked them back. You didn't solve the environment in which they lived. And so they like the high copper environment. They get back to making sure that they can thrive because the copper hasn't changed. And so I kind of always say to practitioners, if you're going to run a GI test, run a hair mineral analysis too, just so that you can make sure the internal environment is really, really good. And so I'd like to see, alongside a lot of the really advanced testing we can do, that we don't forget that minerals are absolutely the core. And I work with a lot of practitioners who really have picked that up, and they'll do a GI test or they'll do a Dutch test to look at hormone levels, or they'll even run genetic testing, and then they'll come back and they'll look at the minerals. And it's almost you have to correct the mineral levels before you can actually do anything with. And genetic testing is a great one. You can have a genetic test that says, well, the person has these SNPs that show that they need XYZ. But the mineral test says I shouldn't give that yet because of the effect that will have on A, B, and C. What should I do? And I'm always like, well, correct A, B, and C. You can send them off with a protocol for the rest of their lives, but get a level playing field before you do that. Otherwise, you're just going to exacerbate problems that are very current now.
Good stuff. Yeah. So great. So, maybe as a final question, besides everybody grabbing a HTMA test, what would be some good tips that you could give somebody for balancing out their health, their conditions at present, if they have any concerns in these areas?
Okay, I suppose my go-to while you're waiting for a test result would be think about your adrenal system, think about what you can do about that. So meditation, that really will help. Self-hypnosis, prayer, there are lots of things, yoga, personal dislike of mine, Tai Chi, that's very personal. Um, there are lots of things you can do that will help reset the adrenals, so start with that. Basic, quick one, make sure you get sunlight every morning. I know you're in Ireland. I'm actually quite lucky. I'm in the south of the UK, so I stand a better chance of getting some sunlight. But however little sunlight you can get, make sure you get sunlight first thing in the morning. Pay attention to sleep quality. That one is so important. Pay attention to hydration. Start with some basics. Add a little bit of salt to your water. Think about either variety of color or variety of plant foods in the diet. Think about how nose to tail you can eat. So some really basic things that have to do with the diet and lifestyle.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Great tips, and I agree with every one of them 100%. So,
That's a relief, isn't
yes.
it?
So that wraps up today's episode with Karen Watkins from Mineral Check UK. I hope you found this conversation as insightful as I did. Minerals truly are the foundations of physiology. They determine how we produce energy, how we detoxify, how we regulate stress, and how resilient or fragile our metabolic systems become. And HTMA, when interpreted correctly, gives us a deeper understanding of these long-term patterns almost than any other test. So if you'd like to learn more about Karen's work or exploring HTMA further for yourself or for your clients, you can find links in the show notes to the mineral check and to Karen's contacts. We'll put that in there. And as always, thank you for listening to the Integrative Continuum. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it, leave a review, tag us on social media. It helps us to reach more people. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. Thank you again to Karen Watkins. Stay curious, stay well, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the Integrative Continuum. I hope today's conversation gave you new insights and practical tools for your own health journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with someone who would benefit, and leave us a review. It helps us spread this message further. Until next time, I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep moving forward on your path to integrative health.